today on the Stash, we're talking about a game that is very near and dear to my heart. A game that I have two separate stories from two separate portions of my life involving this game. A game that released on the Nintendo Entertainment System, also had an arcade version, and the NES version is far superior to it. I, of course, am talking about Double Dragon. Double Dragon, the godfather of beat-em-up games. RGT. Well, this game came out in 1986 and it had beat-em. I don't care. I don't care. As far as a traditional beat-em-up game, what you expect from a beat-em-up game, Double Dragon was the template. And I grew up not realizing that there was an arcade version of this game. I always thought it was just the NES version. And much like Ninja Gaiden, which also had an arcade version, the NES version was far superior. It has better music, the gameplay is better, and the arcade version, although it has better character sprites in terms of like size and stuff like that, the game just doesn't play well because there's so much slowdown plaguing the whole adventure as you are playing. So my introduction to Double Dragon was, I was being babysat by my mom's friend's kids. It was Joe and his sister. I don't remember his sister's name. I remember I played Mall Madness with her, the board game. It's kind of fun. But Joe and I were playing some NES games in his room, just, you know, the random stuff. And then Joe was a little bit older. And so he looks at me and he's like, "Yo, son, you ever played Double Dragon before?" And I'm like, "Double Dragon? Well, what is this? What are you talking about, good sir?" And then he put Double Dragon into the NES, and I was just blown away. I had never seen a video game like this, because most of the games that I were playing, you know, I had like Super Mario Brothers, okay? A very traditional NES game. I had Tecmo Bowl, which a bit more realistic, but still, like, you know, you couldn't like make out individual faces or anything. But Double Dragon's like real world settings, violence, beating people up, which is cool. And of course, Double Dragon starts out with a very, very deep narrative, a very gripping narrative. You have a girlfriend, she gets punched in the stomach, and then some dude picks her up and kidnaps her. So you must save your girlfriend with either yourself or your twin brother, Billy and Jimmy, the Double Dragons, or Bimmy and Jimmy, if you're playing the NES version of the game, to set out and save the damsel in distress. Now, I know it's 2023. We're not allowed to have stuff like this. But this came out in the 80s when, I mean, people just realized it's like, yo, it's a video game. Like, it's not that serious, bro. It's just like an 80s movie. Let's not get all worked up about it. The gameplay is where Double Dragon really shines, though, because like I said, this was kind of like the first beat 'em up game of all time. Now, unfortunately, the NES version did not have co-op in terms of a traditional sense. It was more like in Mario Brothers, where one person could be Mario and one person would be Luigi, and you would play at different times. Now, the arcade version did have the co-op factor, and Double Dragon 2 on the NES did have the co-op factor, but unfortunately in this game, it's pretty much a single player experience, but you could switch between characters. Now, what's cool about Double Dragon is the leveling system, because the more enemies you beat up, the higher level your character gets, and you unlock additional moves. I really like this. Some people don't, but I think it helps keep things fresh throughout this game because of the fact that, although it's not a super long game or anything like that, you want to constantly unlock new stuff to keep yourself interested in the game. You go through a whole bunch of different levels, some of which were done exclusively for the NES version to elongate it, and I think all the levels themselves are pretty good. Unfortunately, they decided to add in some platforming into the later levels of the game, and I mean, this isn't a platforming game. Like, the precise jumps you need to do in this game, they kind of don't really exist. Like, it's very, you have to sort of get the feeling for it in order to be able to do these jumps. Now, one of the cool things about the games is the weapon system in it. Different enemies will have different weapons, like a box of TNT or a dynamite stick or a knife, and then you could pick up these weapons if they miss you when they try to attack you, and then you could stab someone. You could hit them with a whip with the Lindas, because the Linda enemies have a whip, and I have an aunt named Linda, and I always used to think, am I beating up my aunt? Like, that's kind of messed up, because you have the Wills, you have the Lindas, you have the Abobos. The Abobos are freaking cool, like this big roided out monster. Like, why? Everything in this game is so realistic as far as the enemies are concerned. Why all of a sudden are we introducing this massive abobo science gone wrong experiment person into the game? I don't know, but it's freaking cool because abobos are awesome. I really just love everything about this game though. I think the visual style, it was really well done. Like, yes, they definitely took inspiration from the arcade game, but I think they did a good job of adapting it to the NES and what the system was capable of. And I think it replicates the levels in a decent enough manner, but gives them their own individual identity that only the NES version really has. So I think that's a really good thing. The sprites themselves are a little bit on the tiny side, especially when compared to the arcade version of the game. But I mean, you know, this is an NES. You have to have limitations, especially comparing it to an arcade game. We're a couple generations out before arcade games and home consoles are on the same footing. Now, one thing that's just the best about this game, the absolute best, is the soundtrack. This soundtrack is like a top 5 soundtrack to me. Whether you're talking about, you know, the first song, or you're talking about like, every song is great. Every song is great, catchy melodies, different, somewhat different from the arcade version, and it just makes them far, like the music is like one of the best parts about this game. I don't care what anyone says. The music is freaking phenomenal. Just timeless tunes, excellent chip tunes. It's just so good. It's just so good. Every level has a great song. There's not a single bad song in this game, and you can't say that for most video games. Now, they actually included another mode into the NES version, which kind of predates one-on-one fighting games, in which you pick one of the characters, either Bimmy or Jimmy, or, you know, some of the enemy characters that are in the game or whatever, and you're put into like a one-on-one fighting situation in a local mode that was, like I said, exclusively added into this game. Now, it's not great. It doesn't play all that well, but it gives you a little bit of extra replayability with the game, and it's fun to dabble in it from time to time. But like I said, there's 2 stories that involve Double Dragon, and the second story is in a different time place. So I was probably like 6, 7 years old during the initial story, and now let's fast forward to when I'm 13. I went into a micro play, I think it was called, that was a video game store chain, and I went in there with myself and Pecker Dupree. Pecker Dupree was he was trading in stuff to get like a new system. I think he might have been getting a Saturn. I don't know what he was getting, but we went in there, we were looking at stuff, and we saw a copy of Double Dragon, and so I'm like, oh, yo, Double Dragon. And Pecker Dupree's like, yeah, we still haven't beaten that yet. And there's this little piece of shit behind the counter. I will never forget this man. His face is burned into my mind, and he haunts me still to this day. His name was Wayne. I looked at his name tag. He was probably in his 40s. He had like a kind of a bald head, but he had like the skullet, and he had a long ponytail. He was probably 5'4", glasses. He had a little pot belly. He looks at us. Double Dragon? You guys have never beaten Double Dragon? I was like, nah. Everyone's beating Double Dragon. I was like, who the f*** are you, Wayne? Who the f*** are you? I will beat your f***ing ass. I'm 13 years old. I don't care. I will destroy you, Wayne. Who had the last laugh, though, Wayne? Looks like RGT did, because I've beaten Double Dragon. And now, I let out my anger and my frustrations from 20 plus years ago. 25 years ago, I remember you. You son of a bitch. I hope you're rotting somewhere. You don't even have to be dead. You just be rotting in like a smelly apartment playing Double Dragon. And hey, that's a pretty good life. So let me know in the comment section down below. Double Dragon for the NES. Is this one of your favorite games of all time? Because it should be. One of the few NES games I own. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I own 6 NES games, and Double Dragon you bet your ass it's one of them. This is one of the greatest games of all time. And as always, thank you for joining me here on The Stash. Let me know what you think of Double Dragon in the comment section down below. Yes, I know the Sega Master System version exists. Yes, I really like the Sega Master System version. Yes, the Sega Master System version is probably the best version because it blends the NES and the arcade version, but I mean, my nostalgia lies with the NES. So deal with it. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next video. Later.